The thing I get asked about quite a lot is how do I use chromatic notes, how do I play outside? And I think one thing that's important to remember, you need to like the sound of chromatic playing and outside playing before you try and do it. You can't just do it because some other guy on the internet told you you're inadequate for not being able to do it. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you know the blues scale, you've probably used some chromatic notes in the most musical way possible without realizing that that's what you were doing. If you look at the minor pentatonic scale, and then you look at what we call the blues scale, which has this extra note, it's kind of the worst note in the world. If you land on that, you're hurting people. Really, really jarring note. And yet most of us know blues licks where we can use it in context, so it's an ornament to add a certain funkiness to the fifth or indeed the fourth. It's not meant to be a melodic note in its own right, it's meant to add a certain feel to the more correct sounding notes that live either side of it. If you can do that, then in theory you know everything you need to know to use any one of the 12 notes at any point over any chord, so long as you use it responsibly. And I think the main things are to play it safe. If you follow every chromatic, jarring sounding note with another good note that's not too far away from it melodically, if you can just step up a semitone and magically you're playing a note that's in the chord, that suddenly justifies the shocking note you played a millisecond ago. And the other thing that makes you sound even more confident is if you can arrange the notes in such a way that the good note lands in a more important part of the beat. And these are things you can't be too conscious of these things when you play. But if you're listening to what you do, then trial and error, along with trying to feel responsible for the notes you play, should result in that same end product. The chromatic notes going where they're most welcome, and the more melodic notes falling in the stronger places within the pulse of the music. So there are a few ways you could approach this. You might look at the pentatonic scale and fill in the gaps. Or something like that makes sense because you've got all these chromatic notes in a row, but the highest one and the lowest one are right, so the listener will forgive any anomalies they hear in between. Or you could maybe go right back to first principles and say, I'm going to use the notes that are in the chord, and that will be my template. So, I don't know. And then look at where the chromatic approach notes live relative to that shape. And something like that, there are some horrendously wrong notes in there, but because they're jutted right up against a chord tone, you're immune from criticism up to a point. And that seems to be how that works, or my personal favourite. It's the idea of the chord tones being the skeleton, and then you flesh it out with chromatic approach notes. And when people talk about playing outside, I think that's the same thing, but you zoom out, you look at the same concept from further away. So instead of one wrong note leading up to a right note, it's a wrong key for a while leading into a right key. Same principles apply. If you can get lost but then somehow land on your feet without the melody jumping too far, and with the first nice note happening somewhere important within the pulse of the music, you sound cool rather than wrong. I find it interesting that you can use every single one of the notes in the chromatic scale and the listener will still know what chord you're implying. There must have been all 12 notes in there, but hopefully it sounds suitably like B minor rather than F major or something. It's where you put the notes, not what the notes are, that I think is the most important thing.